Welcome to a new episode of Innovation Ecosystems Unpacked. Today with two special guests, Cinzia from Beyond and Chris from AWTI. And today we're going to talk about knowledge-intensive startups, spin-offs, success rates, financing, everything that has to do with that. But first of all, let's introduce the guest. I'd like to start with you, Cinzia. How did you get here, right? I think that's the...
So I started my PhD actually in Delft. So I'm originally from Italy. I studied there, and then I was like thinking, okay, I want to challenge myself. And so I came to the Netherlands to do my PhD here. And while doing the PhD, me and the other two co-founders of Beyond, we invented the core technology of our startup. And so then we spun out from the Delft University.
Okay. And did you always envision to be an entrepreneur?
Myself, yes. I tried, but I didn't have the right idea. Mm-hmm. So actually, I tried a couple of times with things, but I never started one because I'm not convinced about the whole situation. And as soon as William and Nicholas, the other two co-founders, they came out with the new idea, with the technology, I was like, yeah, that's the one that I want to, let's say, to push, and so I convinced them to join and start the startup. So yeah, I'm the fault of everything.
Right. Chris, how about you?
I do come from an entrepreneurial family, so to say, but early on I decided that entrepreneurship was not my thing to do. But I was still very interested in it, so my studies were on innovative entrepreneurship. I did a PhD in entrepreneurship, and now I work at the Advisory Council for Science, Technology and Innovation, the AWTI, where we recently published a report and advice to the government on knowledge-intensive startups, spin-outs, and how to scale them, basically how to grow them. Mm-hmm. So that's basically why I'm here, I think.
Nice. And what would you say is the most important thing that AWTI does to the government? What is the added value? Yeah, well, it's an interesting construction. Mm-hmm. It's a group of 9 or 10 thought leaders, experts in the field, from science, from business, from policy, from decision makers, so to say. They convene every month, and they challenge certain policy in the Netherlands on science, technology, on innovation. So it's both independently, as in it's always independently, and sometimes it's requested, and sometimes it's unsolicited advice. And this time it was, the council deemed it very important to tackle this topic of knowledge-intensive startups. It was basically a question from the parliament. Mm-hmm. They acknowledged that there were a lot of startups starting from universities, but they were not growing as well as they could. And so they asked the AWTI, this council, to come up with an advice on how to improve that. And for that, we did a study actually with the Erasmus Center of Entrepreneurship. And we based partly on that study and on other research and interviews, we based this advice. Mm-hmm. So that's basically how the council works and how it does the job. And it directly advises to the ministers, to the cabinet. And there is the idea of our former chair, who always says we have to speak truth to power, and that's the idea. Nice. And my role is to prepare the advice, to write a lot of stuff, to research background stuff. Okay, and talking about the specific question was about knowledge-intensive startups. So that also means that there are other types of startups. Mm-hmm. Well, what is your idea on that? Is it different or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is definitely a reason to make a distinction between knowledge-intensive startups and the rest. I think in reality, it's more like a sort of a scale in which there's differences. Together with the Erasmus Center of Entrepreneurship, we basically operationalized knowledge-intensive as spin-outs and spin-offs
from universities, but also from private company labs and stuff. But I think the importance is that the more knowledge-based you are, the more you work with fundamental new knowledge and technology, the longer and more challenging I think the road to the market will be. And in competition, for example, for money, from a startup that is using a proven technology, close to the market knowledge, it's much easier to make your business work basically than for startups that are coming from with new knowledge from knowledge institutes. So and if you both have to compete for funding, if you don't realize that, and so that's one part, and the other part is that the business it creates, it can be much more innovative, much more radical. It can start that's well established in the literature. It can start of completely new sectors, domains. So societally speaking and economically speaking, they have a much bigger impact as well. So there are more challenges, but the impact is also bigger for this category of startups, I would say.
And you are a knowledge-intensive startup, as the definitions say. So hearing this, what are the things that you... what are your first
I saw all the
thoughts?
struggle behind it. No, I completely agree with all that you said. And actually, I have to say that, you are always like in the middle. Is something that is about short-term value or long-term value. And that's something that a highly intensive knowledge startup brings. The problem is that it's all based on science, cross-fertilization between different kind of fields, and most of the time is a market that might be not there yet or is immature. And that means that there is a lot of risk. And not always, let's say, as European, I think in general, investors are more or less risk takers. So that's something also that you might struggle a bit because it's really hard to find some traction at the beginning. So definitely is, let's say, let's say, knowledge-intensive startup. They have a lot of costs because anyway there are like 10 years of development maybe before to have the final product there. So then you need also to attract a lot of talents, and most of the time they are really expensive too, because they have PhD degree, and of course you have to, let's say, there is competition also to attract those talents. And in particular between also Europe and US, it's really harder for Europe to attract those kind of talents, and the other way around is way easier. So it's not only capital, it's about also team, and it's about also the stakeholders of the whole value chain, because there is a lot of this kind of innovation, they don't have a regulation yet. So you need really a lot of advocacy at European level, but also globally, to really create new rules. So you need always to find someone that can fight this new trend with you and change usually and disrupt the way in which currently things are done.
And you mentioned, right, there is sort of a balance between, on the one hand, fundamental research from that perspective, and on the other hand, creating a business or growing a business. How would you, from your perspective when you started, would you have done things differently to maybe get the balance in a, I don't know if maybe you already have a good balance, but would you have done it differently?
Things can always be improved. Let's say once you have done it, you know what you always can do better. Definitely at the beginning, I can tell I had more of a scientific mind. So we were like not really aware at the beginning. We knew the power of our technology, but it took for us sometimes to learn also how to talk to our customers that are biologists. So I'm a microelectronic engineer by background, and I don't know anything about biology, and then I have to learn something to explain them and to let them perceive that value and that they might trust me, and they have to, let's say, they can trust me. So that's something also that takes time. Definitely the earlier you do it, the better it is, and there is always a right timing from everything. So I think maybe we spun out when the product could still be developed in the university, but on the other side, you also need to to go away to really start to prove yourself with the real world. So definitely the timing on when bringing that technology out of the lab and really find the market fit for it are the things that are more crucial at the beginning.
So what could, in that particular, because it's a nice example, right? What would you think could help if you leave it within the university, but still take the step to get a better market validation? Maybe that's the word. But
yeah, it would be nice, an example, to have in the university maybe senior business developer that are really like on you, on your case, and helping you really teaching you and mentoring at the beginning on how you should find those first steps of customer fit or like talking to investors. Sometimes this kind of lack of knowledge is given by accelerator. That's true, but sometimes accelerator also are two broad topics. So an example in our case is life science is definitely also not something that we typically do in TU Delft because it's more engineering related. So having something that helps the entrepreneur to do the first step and let's say some guidance there, that will be really helpful, I think.
Okay. What do you exactly do?
Okay, so let's see if I practice enough.
Nice.
So basically, if new drugs are developed, let's say to pick up the ingredients of a new drug, biologists have to use in their labs or animal studies or animal or cells in a plastic dish. So as you can imagine, cells in a plastic dish are not really feeling like in your body. You keep on moving, your heart beating, and so on. And the animal instead, there are most of the disease or like neurological disease that cannot really be tested on animals. And also there are many ethical concerns. So the ideal case would be to have a human body in a biological lab. That is even more unethical. so the solution that we found is that we developed a tool that is a computer chip, so like the one that you have in your smartphone, that has the same functionality of the human body. So it nourishes, stimulates, and monitors cells that biologists can insert. And basically you can test drugs on a sort of avatar of a human body.
And how does the chip simulates a human body?
So an example, it has an artificial blood vessel inside. So you can create a blood vessel in it, and on top you can have an example.
Physically, there's a physical...
It's a physical blood vessel.
In a computer chip?
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty neat.
Yeah, you use exotic material, that's let's say our know-how there. So you can basically create the interface between an example, the heart and a blood vessel. And those heart cells actually are made from, and also the blood vessels are made from human cells. So it can be the one of you, in the future it can be mine.
Yeah.
And basically you can recreate a super small prototype of your heart. And your heart, an example, is beating, so the chip can also beat. So we can basically, is made of flexible material, so it can also start beating with the same frequency. And the beauty of it is that we can integrate electrodes and sensors. So an example, when you go to the doctor and you get your ACG done, you can do the same in the chip.
In your chip.
And so basically, let's say that we want to personalize a cure for you. We basically have your heart, we insert the drug that we think it might be the best for you, and then we check with the signal if it's giving you a heart attack or if it works.
Rather not.
But how small is it?
It's a 1 by 1 centimeter chip.
Okay.
And it's really small.
And if it would be, okay, this is more my personal question. If it's like 10 times bigger, so it's like 10 by 10, what would that be beneficial because you can...
Actually, let's say we are more focused on, because those sets are also expensive and let's say there are a lot of economical situation around it. So for us it's better to have it small because we just want to prove that if a drug works or what it happens. But if you use an example 3D printer, you can, there are out there people that are 3D printing entire tissues and then you can regenerate or transplant organs or pieces. So that's that's another parallel track.
But is your technology is based on the chip, right? So the chip does functions, and then you put a vessel on it or in it, and then but it's the chip that works the magic, right?
Yes.
That's
the
your
the
value
core value.
proposition.
The core value is that one, and that's how actually the patent behind it and all the invention is there.
Yeah.
And then there is also endless know-how. That's something that usually deep knowledge startup have, because there are a lot of tips and tricks that you cannot put in a patent, but actually that the experience gives to you, that you are able to come up with new solutions.
Yeah, but this is fascinating, because if you describe it like this, like everybody sees that this is a product that has potential, but also that it needs a lot of time to further develop, and also the legal and the sort of the legitimacy and the whole mission or perspective where you're working on towards personalized medicine, which is a big sort of trend going on now, and that kind of shows, like from an ecosystem perspective, I think, how the context where you're in and how much needs to be done and developed before you get there. Yeah. Contrary to like the other kind of startups, which have a perfectly right place to be, but can just, based on the current situation in the economy and the current knowledge that is out there, can just add a new product or a new process.
Because at what stage were you when you sort of said maybe if the timing would be perfect, like taking out of the university, and then it's at a certain TRL level, I think, right, or a TR level. What from that point you had to do to make it fit to customers saying, yes, I want to buy this?
Yeah. So what we did, basically, is that we developed it technically completely. The chip was done. The problem is that we had to put cells, and we were 3 microelectronic engineers. Okay. So first of all, the first type was a biologist. Then the second thing, and already there, like 3 microelectronics engineers have to hire a biologist. How you're gonna pick him up? Let's say with the interview, we were like, what we are gonna ask, because for us they can tell everything. So we really ask a lot of recommendation, and we look in our network of professors in the biological field that could help us with that. So those are also kind of struggles that you have at the beginning. And then basically what we did is that we start to co-develop with Leiden University Medical Center and Erasmus Medical Center, with people that were already in our network. And we started to test it with them. And of course, you have bugs, failures, and things to adjust. And it would have been nice to try it before to spun out, because anyway, that process took 1.5 years. And you need those data to then attract people that don't know you. Because those people that we attracted, they were like knowing us, and they were knowing our capabilities, and so that helped. Yeah. But really,
you searched in I would say, the same type of group of people, right? So researchers.
We went through peers. Let's say, as a PhD, we knew people. We knew
that's
PhD
what I mean.
in other, and that's the way. And that's something that I always recommend to whichever, like, people want to start a startup in a university, is really like ask your peers for help, because that's gonna be the best feedback. I remember, like, once we were still in the university, we interviewed 30 of them in one room, because there was a meeting of a conference, and we took the opportunity to say, okay, you know what, we have 30 biologists here, let's ask them what they want. And of course then they can dream whatever. Let's say it can be, it's never enough. But it was an initial way to understand, okay, which are the priorities.
My question is more, if we would have met at that stage, and I would say, you know what, I would connect you to Mozambique, who was also here in our podcast, who developed meat, and that could have been interesting, because that's a company. Maybe they also are knowledge-intensive company, but still, as a company, would that have changed? You think?
I think, let's say, for sure, the problem is that if I was Cinzia back then, because now I don't have to think about Cinzia now. Cinzia now knows that has to go around and ask people. And no matter what happens, like, you will get something out of it. It can be just that you learn maybe that you cannot, an example, help Mozambique to do something. But back then we were scientists more, so like you need sometimes to learn that you have to get out of the lab and ask. So that's a push that.
But you went out of the lab, but you visited fellow researchers, and I'm just saying.
No, we also contact pharma companies. Okay. Like we took like within the network, but also cold emails. And I have to say that people are more enthusiastic about new technology than you think. But then, so talking, it's always easier. Everybody wants to know like a weird topic like the one that we are doing. The problem is that how you turn that first contact in something tangible, or it just stays there as a conversation. So also, let's say that part of translating the value out of a conversation is not always easy, because the two persons have to be also in the same. It has to be the right moment for both. And for pharma company, an example, we are collecting a lot of data. We are talking to them, but of course, you need really to prove way more. So it takes time.
Yeah, what I see and which I think is really interesting is that as a company, you are as a startup, you have to sort of transition the different levels of your environment, in the sense that you start in your lab and then it's very research based, and at some point you have to sort of get out there, meet other people, probably in a sort of still a university-based ecosystem where there are valorization activities going on, where there are incubator or coaches, which I think still can be developed, and that there can be improvements there. And then at some point you're sort of scaling outside of the region, and then the company, and then so that's sort of a path that you can envision. And I think from a policy perspective and for ecosystem builders and people that are maybe interested in this podcast, I think these transitions has to be as smooth as possible for a company, because there's so many things you have to deal with all the time, that these transitions are really fundamental. Like what you're describing in the beginning, like there's also some interesting research on, and which has been sort of termed with the term sort of unconsciously incompetent, in the sense that a researcher going into business doesn't know at first what he or she doesn't know, basically. That's what you're describing back right now, I think. And there's people from incubators or centers of entrepreneurship that can confront you with this sort of lack of knowledge, and then push you outside of the building. And
I think there is also a cultural kind of background, because a lot of PhD right now are from abroad. So an example, I was in a country that was not mine, and I had to create my own network. So let's say if it was in Italy, okay, there would be any other troubles. But for sure, like the idea of approaching someone, also reading the way of asking something, it would have been way easier. And instead, even if I was already like for 4 years before in the Netherlands, but with a different role, so getting into the business is way different than be on the scientific side. It's something that you have to learn, and you can just practice, fail, and improve. But it's something that would be also interesting for people that comes from abroad and choose to open a startup.
Because do you think that your company is different than other biotech companies that didn't originate from a university?
I have to say that most of the biotech company or license IP or anyway are based on some knowledge that is developed in the university. It is you can definitely see the difference of speed, or also the confidence that they, let's say, the amount of customers that they can attract if the managers or the founders had previous experience. So seniority counts. And also an example, if you are, let's say, in that field for many years because maybe you were a professor, or maybe because you were working in pharma companies, and you are in your country, so you have all your network. Definitely, if I choose to start as a company, I know which kind of guy we might be interested in, and probably because I'm senior, those people are in the right position to taking a decision. And instead, given also my age, I knew only people that can try to push a decision, but are not the final.
Is that also something that you saw in the research?
Well, there were a couple of challenges that we identified, and I think, one of the things were that this I think the skill, the teams, and the skill that you need, I think is very important. It's one of the challenges to get the right set of skills in the team. So I think that kind of relates to this. And another important challenge we encountered was that the agreements that startups make in the beginning of their life with universities or with knowledge centers, also other than universities, in terms of patents and licenses and equity, sometimes lead to problems in a later stage. So I think that's at least two of the big challenges we encountered. We found out, and although in the beginning of the life of a startup, the interests are very much aligned between universities and startups, at some point they might diverge. And then I think it's important for startups to have are connected to people outside of out of the university, or at least independent advisors that are not also part of the university. So I think there are some challenges there. So the advisory report advises to improve that, and there are some guidelines basically to arrange that, but they were up until now very much designed by the knowledge institutes themselves, and we advise to make them more equal, also from the startup perspective. And recently, the cabinet has reacted to this advisory report and said that they're going to sort of encourage to have this dialogue around these guidelines, how to deal with equity, with licenses of startups, to make it to see which problems they can solve and improve the balance. Yeah, so I think that's an important step forward.
Because you talked about also the investment part. Yeah, maybe interesting because I heard you are looking at fundraising, or maybe already are fundraising. What is your current, I would say, impression on? Is it easy to get in contact, or do you think there are the right investors here in the Netherlands? How's it going?
For sure, they are always reachable. Let's say the only thing is that with companies like us is that you need an investor that knows both the biological part and the hardware part, and that's almost impossible to find. Mm-hmm. So basically, you need all to split the funding round, attracting one good investor on each topic, or anyway, it can be really hard to find the combination of all. So for sure, an example, what I noticed so far is that there are more and more PhD also that are involved into the venture capitalist world. That helps. Because a lot of first steps are really trying to deliver the importance of what you are doing. Yeah. And the importance is all in the technology and technological details that if you don't have that knowledge, it's really hard to appreciate. Yeah. And also the market of our technology is still at its infancy. Let's say this kind of technology are born from 10 years, but definitely, let's say there is a lot of lack in regulatory system that cannot really help in speeding up the value. So there is risk there. So it's really important there is a lot of let's say transfer of knowledge between us and the investors. Mm-hmm. And I'll try to let them perceive, okay, I know that is a leap of faith sometimes, but I know how to manage that risk. Yeah. So definitely, yes, it's a bit. But I have to say that in the Netherlands there are interesting investors. What I also believe is that there is. So we are looking firstly, of course, to have investors here, but it's also a missed opportunity if you don't look in Europe.
Of course, yeah.
Because anyway, I think out there is more and more capital available, and maybe that can be also a way to share risks. Among investors.
And did you also, let's say, already maybe question asked about the other investors in this case, right? The university, who's a shareholder in the company. Is that already something that you, because that also came a little bit out of the research, of course. Is that also something that you already noticed, that investors ask questions about that, or?
Let's say if you're in the Netherlands, they are more aware about how the agreements with the university are done, because are quite standard, let's say. So in the Netherlands, it's not a problem. Of course, there are differences, I think, more between, let's say, I don't know really the details, but I think between an example, Netherlands, let's say Germany, and an example if you go more in the North European countries like Norway and Sweden, they have a completely different kind of set of rules. So those investors might not like really understand the way in which we are doing business here. For the Netherlands, it's more, let's say, typical.
I think still there. So I think you're being really kind, but I think it's still, there still needs to be a lot to be done. I think in the Netherlands the IP, like when a company starts from the university and the knowledge is developed there, the IP is at first solely in the hands of the Knowledge Institute. Yep. While in other countries, for example in the US, it's split, and at least a part is owned by the founder or the inventor, which makes a total different incentive to then go. We have talked for the advice with companies, saying that at the start of the company, then or with the first investor round, the university is still part of that. So they still have a large part of the shares. Then an investor comes in who also wants to have a big part of the shares. Then the amount of shares that rests with the entrepreneur, that is actually going to have to do like 99% of the legwork. The incentive structure is just not good here. So I think there's really needs to be done something in that case in the Netherlands, and I think the research that we done was pretty clear in that, and I think the advisory council has been also quite clear in that the current the current situation hampers the growth of startups. So I think there's definitely improvements possible. I think it's not the worst of all, but and I think companies can still grow in this setting, but I think we can improve the constellation. Although I understand from the university point of view also, and also with the current idea with Mariano Mazzucato thinking like the entrepreneurial state and the role of the state in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation, that the role is large, and we shouldn't have the situation in which there's only public costs and private gains. So I totally understand that side as well, but if we don't have the
gains in the end.
No, exactly. There's no gains at all.
No,
you know,
exactly.
like so. That's,
because I think that one of the things also I think from our research is that it's good that the university, right, is part of because it helps the reputation, right?
Definitely.
But on the other hand, right, but actually no, I have to say differently. What you're saying is that it's good that there's a university, but the way how the university is now as a shareholder, that should be changed. So
yeah, definitely.
And I think about it. What other ways?
Yeah, and we've I think we touched upon that in this podcast as well. Is that there's a big role of the university to play in terms of the facilities and the coaching and the helping to break out of this university contact with external advisors, etc. So the whole valorization system around knowledge institutes is super important. Yep. And I also totally understand the licensing deal for the work that has been done in the at the university and using the facilities of the university. But as a shareholder, I think you have to be very reluctant in that role.
Yeah. And also we are looking at also based on your examples, like you need an investor who knows about let's say biotech, and the other one knows about I would say hardware or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that also what you saw?
Yeah. There's at the moment there's an interesting debate going on about that, because on the one hand there is a lot of money, and there was a newspaper article about that as well. But I think for these knowledge-intensive startups, there's really still a lot to be done. There are a few high-tech investor funds in the Netherlands. They're doing really good work, I think, but the knowledge, the technical knowledge and the sort of the high-tech knowledge at investors can be improved. And
what is your idea on that? Because you mentioned the example.
Definitely, I think it takes time, of course, because then also as a scientist before, let's say you have to think about, okay, me as a PhD, I want to get into the venture capitalist world. I don't know nothing about it. So, of course, it would be nice to have more knowledge during maybe your PhD time or the university, to get in touch with alternative career paths, because this is one of them. You can become an advisor for this kind of knowledge. That would help definitely, because I can understand that it can be scary from the investor point of view to say, okay, this technology is good. How they are gonna validate that, or how they are gonna validate my solution compared to the competitors.
Yeah.
So definitely that's something that I think is on investor side, but it might be also from the knowledge institution to really, let's say, push scientists to think about some economical value out of their research or their kind of career.
Yeah.
And then definitely is something that is still a bit missing is the risk taking. Let's say, I think it's let's say is in all over Europe that anyway you want to lower the risk. But sometimes there are not that many ways. Let's say you need to have a leap of faith here and there, and it can go bad, but it can go also in a better in a different kind of way. So it would be nice really to have, I don't know if at national level or European level, maybe some, I don't know, some help maybe also for investors if they invest on something like higher risk, in which they say, okay, you are not alone there, maybe we put
But is it higher risk, or is it perceived higher risk?
It's perceived, because if I come with that idea, you don't have to put your money, so you get enthusiastic about it. But if I'm coming to you and I say, okay, can you give me 10,000 euro for that? Are you gonna give me those money for something that you really don't know? Then it's completely different.
But is that true? Because what we see from other research also in terms of investment, or what we see with startups here and scale-ups here, is that an investor also for 80% invests in entrepreneur. So if the entrepreneur believes you are able to get this done, then
definitely. It depends also on the perception that they have on the team, for sure. That's the most important
because if
part.
you say 3 people with a PhD,
that was the biggest part at the beginning, the biggest problem, because it looks like it's never you will, if you have a PhD title, you will be always a scientist. Yeah. But that's not true. Or at least this is something that I'm, Beyond is was funded in 2017, so from that moment on, I'm working on it. So I probably spend more time now as a CEO of Beyond than doing my PhD, but still, I'm actually my PhD.
You should take away your title, maybe even.
And I remove it.
Yeah.
Because it's just a way to say, okay, I was able to learn really complex stuff. So now I brainwash myself. Yeah. I got some traction, so I know how to do it. But definitely it's if you have you're more senior, or maybe if you have a more relevant kind of business background, or maybe you were working before in a pharma company, that will give more trust, of course. Yeah. But that is usually not the environment in which the knowledge-intensive startups are. But
is that then the problem in the end?
In the end, that's one of the problems. I think there are some ways to overcome it by having advisors, an example. But of course, you have to pay for those. And also, usually are money that you invest instead on R&D. And so that's always I keep on growing. It's always a limit between I keep on growing my R&D, my technology, or should I make the entire team more credible, just even adding only a name. Yeah. But maybe you keep on doing your own things also, just like you hang that picture just to say they are with us, but maybe they don't do anything. That's also something that I think pedigree should be a bit evaluated there as well. Like let's say, I think an example, there are also PhD and PhD. If I say that maybe I was doing my PhD in Stanford and then I started a startup, then
of course,
then
and everybody
I'm gonna
believes
give
you.
you more money. And what does it mean? Like,
But these are all sort of, I don't know, proxies for, like it's sort of instead of understanding the technology. I think, well, like if you have investors that at least for a long way can understand what you're working on, I think you have to you can rely on less of these sort of extra signals of trust, basically. So I think this all helps if you can, for example, show you did your PhD at Stanford, or you have a good business background, but I think it's I think it first starts with being able to exchange the information and the knowledge about your startup and where it's going and the technology. And if you have a good conversation with the investor and the team, then that should be the basis, right, of where you work from.
Yeah, but is a mindset change then in the investors, because the investor always like what you hear or what you, let's say, read everywhere, is that the team is first, and it has to cover the main aspects of it.
Yeah.
But then that doesn't mean that me with a PhD I cannot learn to do the other part, or like I have to grow. I'm aware that I have to grow as faster than beyond, because that's the way in which I can lead it.
Yeah.
But why should you lead it? You think?
So I think there are different kind of stages in a company. So I think at the beginning, of a knowledge-intensive startup, a CEO that doesn't know the technology, or he cannot really manage the risk.
True.
So I think like I'm the best CEO for this phase of Beyond.
Okay.
Maybe in the future it might happen also that I will need to attract more pharma company. That means that the focus of Beyond will not be on the technology anymore. Maybe will be more on the network or on the political power, or maybe the
But why? But you're saying that you are developing yourself as a CEO.
Because before I didn't know even what the CEO was doing.
Okay.
At the beginning, like
you're saying so you need a sort of basic knowledge on at least think about a company, but with a technology focus.
Yes, definitely. Because then I cannot like really say, if the CTO comes to me and say, okay, I want to do this kind of technology, of course. Then I have to think, okay, as an engineer, I will say, oh, let's go for it. But then many times I told them no, because economically there is another things to do. And that's something that I developed over time, of course. Yeah. But I think, and let's say in the future, I think changing yourself, that means also that it depends if you want to put yourself first or the company first. Yeah. So and that's I think is for every CEO that. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. No, because I think it's interesting because, for example, we are now starting together with Yes Delft, so ACA with Yes Delft, to start a talent platform where we want to connect really students already from an earlier stage with each other to create companies, but also maybe an Erasmus student that joins a Yes Delft startup, or just already at the phase where the company is being created. Yeah. To make sure, because we see, for example, that Erasmus startups are, from a business perspective, great, but because the what they are doing is not so impactful. And I mean impact in terms of what it can change the world, but also impactful in terms of economic ways, right? So they start a platform which is already there 10 times, so it will not be become big, etc. Yeah. And from the Delft, I'm just saying that Delft now perspective, it's like they're great technologies, but they don't get it at a certain stage that it can become a company, or that it can grow, or So I thought, or we together with AEA, we said let's join that together.
Yeah.
But
there are very good. There's a program at Chalmers University in Gothenburg that does this in one of. I think it's part of a course where they connect engineers and people from the business education programs, and they actually spun out quite some interesting startups. So I think that is also connecting very much to the advisory report, saying that the skill set within your company is super important. On the topic of investors and funds, I think it's important to also note that at the moment there are some new funds being developed from the government, the Deep Tech Fund and the Future Fund. Also partly with or by InvestNL. So I think this attention of technically oriented or high-tech oriented capital, I think there's an acknowledgement that there is a need there in the Netherlands, and I think the government wants to strengthen it, which raises another challenge, I think, because it's then public funds, like public financed investor funds, and how do they deal with the market? Like how do they complement or maybe compete within the market for startups, basically, which is their business. And I think the discussion in the Netherlands needs to develop a little bit further about what is the role of governmental VC. I think there's definitely a role there, but at the moment the dominant idea is still like you need to do that from a market perspective. It's the private investors that take the lead. But together with a colleague, we also looked at the whole streams of VC capital in the Netherlands and showed that actually quite a bit of the privately spent VC comes from public funding. About 1/5 of the money that is finally in private venture capital funds has sort of public funds, a public origin source, because it's through all kind of subsidy schemes or fund constructions. But I think in terms of funding for knowledge-intensive startups, there are steps being made. I think there's improvement that can still be done, but it raises a new question, basically, like what is the role of the government in venture capital funding of startups?
And what do you think it should be?
I'm not completely. I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
I don't have the final answer on this at all. I think there are lots of reasons why government can intervene in the VC landscape. For example, in early stage where governmental VC is already quite a little bit bigger. But I think we are, from a broader trend, like moving away from a totally liberal market economy idea to maybe some more coordinated market interventions, and but the precise role is I think still to be thought out. But I think definitely there's room for early stage, for startups and fields that are highly societally relevant. But then we have to sort of say goodbye to the idea that government intervention cannot sort of compete with private intervention because of private investors, because it's basically impossible if you have to. That's one of the reasons why InvestNL is now in such a difficult situation, because it has to invest alongside market conditions. But without intervening in that same market, which is basically an impossible task. So I think we have to create space for governmental interventions in this, and then maybe acknowledge that there is some market disruption going on there. I think the discussion can be. The discussion is a lot about like, oh no, but our type of startups needs more money, or we have a fund for female entrepreneurship that needs more money, which I totally agree on. But I think there's a fundamental question behind that, like what is in the first place a priori the role of the government in terms of is it just by increasing the amount, or is it directing towards certain markets, sectors, or domains?
yeah, and I think the Ministry of Economic Affairs or Finance hasn't got the final answer either yet. But I think that's an interesting discussion.
Yeah. All right. So, Chris, response to what Martin.
Martin always has good questions. Well, one thing, how should we enforce scientists to start companies? I don't think you should enforce them. I think you should lure them, or how do you call it? Sort of tempt them to engage in entrepreneurship. I think there's a lot being done in the culture around universities, around startups, and around entrepreneurship. So I think there's a good thing going on there. And I think a recent initiative by the joint universities, I think it's called the Faculty of Impact, and where there is sort of an entrepreneurship postdoc positions are being funded now, in which you can sort of start to valorize or develop your PhD work after your. So I think those are good initiatives. I don't think we should enforce them, because I think there's only a small sort of overlap between scientists and entrepreneurs. I think the overlap that there is, I think there's someone sitting across the table from us. We should really help and they can flourish. But I think definitely not all the scientists are entrepreneurs.
No. Cinzia?
Yeah, definitely that giving an option. Let's say in my case, I was looking for the opportunity to learn more about entrepreneurship. So I was subscribing myself with courses and things like that. But as a PhD, you are also following a graduate school.
Yeah.
So that would be nice to have, and is optional. Let's say you can choose which kind of courses you want to follow, to have something there.
Yeah.
But also the knowledge institution might highlight more their company that they spun out with. Let's say sometimes university don't have an example. What I found out compared to the US, that no matter what you do, they are able to multiply it by 10. So I think if we start to give more, let's say, news also on the startup that comes out from that university, it will attract more people to say, okay, they did it, I can do it as well.
Success stories and role models.
Example.
And that's what I do, and I do it with maybe an example. I'm one of the diversity team in QDelft, so I keep on going to the open days. And I try to attract them to show them, okay, I was studying and I studied a lot in my life, but then I went to another path. It's also to encourage new generation to dream about it. And or an example, like in university courses, I'm giving a lecture next week on how we spun out, like from when we got the idea to how we end up here. And I think you need also in those kind of conversation a lot of honesty. Because you don't have to sell the dream, because it's not a dream, it's a roller coaster, and probably it's not for everybody, and that's nice. That's the beauty of it. Otherwise, everybody was doing their own thing. But definitely, it's like having an open conversation on it, and also the knowledge institution might be less shy of showing good and bad cases, because you can always fail, and I think from failure you learn way more than maybe it has been just a serendipity once. That's something that we should do.
And I really liked also, I think that you're boasting is that a lot of people don't pursue an academic career, right? So I think, I don't know about the percentages, but I think more than half, of course, is going away. And I think that it's the role of our universities to support them in also the same as we do for our students, right? Support them in taking the next step in their lives and choosing what to do. It's the same
show
for,
the diversity of paths that you can pursue after that.
Nice.
And the second question, it's really difficult. The second question of Maarten, in how to keep high-tech scale-ups in the Netherlands. I think it's you can't sort of guarantee that, but maybe, and it's just a thought. I've no expert in that field, but maybe if you have some governmental VC funds and you, these through the ownership, the partial ownership from governmental hold investment funds, maybe there's a way of keeping sort of scale-ups in the Netherlands through that route. But otherwise, I wouldn't know how to do so.
Isn't it a question, I think, for you, but isn't it just to create the market conditions so that you remain here as
Sure.
a company, right?
Yeah. So you can't. Yeah. No, that's true. Like if you have the best possible, environment for a company.
It's fine to get funding, but it's the same. Most of it was here, and they explained like, listen, we didn't get an investment from InvestNL because they found it too difficult, and then we get to another, I think some Danish and a Swiss company, and they got a lot of money in. But they remained here in the Netherlands, which is fine. No, but I mean, because they still say at this current stage, the Netherlands is the best way to go. Maybe we go to the US one time because that's better for what they are doing.
But that's true because knowledge-intensive startup, an example, start from a lab, and an example that lab that we are using right now, we cannot really have it by our own, and it would be also.
Why not?
No, it's a million.
How much is it?
I think it's just for maintain that lab. I think it's around 10 million. So it's something that definitely we get inside the lab, and we get in that lab, and we are able to work. Well, of course, we pay, but we are able to do our stuff. And if I'm thinking that, why should I move if I know that I can rely on that facility for this, the other company that maybe is bigger than ours, but it can provide me that kind of material. So I think it's a lot of, you need, first of all, a lot of collaboration among companies. You always are attracting people to, let's say, you need a pool of talent. And I think an example, if you're closer to that, anyway, in the Netherlands, there are a lot of this kind of talents. Yeah. So why moving, an example, in the US, in which we have way more competition for those talents? Yeah. On the other side, you need capital. That's the only way in which I think a company could go away. First of all, there is market, but let's say usually half of your market is always in US, so you have to move there. But that doesn't mean that that you cannot produce here and then and do maybe more commercial on the other side. But definitely, you need also to be still, the Netherlands needs to be relevant for the company to say, okay, this is the place.
So maybe the conclusion is build the best entrepreneurial ecosystem, and then they will stay.
Or maybe even market, I would say, because in the end you also need a place to sell it, or at least to have the companies and everybody aligned to.
But nowadays it's, let's say, Netherlands is a really geographical
it's a good place.
Because you can reach UK whenever you want, you are super close to France and Germany, and anyway, let's say it's way easier. You are in a good geographical position. So on that side, having the headquarters here in Europe is not definitely a problem. The only thing that can I think push me is that if an investor say I will invest 50 million on you, but you have to come there. Yeah. And that's something that is an offer that I will never maybe receive in Europe. So that's
true, and I think that is also the right. I know it's the right reason, but it's a reason to make the impact larger in what you want to achieve. Now, that's the last part. We had a talk with a quantum startup in Delft, and they were also looking for funding. And then I asked, listen. What would you need to grow? We need the lab, right? More time in the lab. I said, okay, so why don't you have more time? We share the lab. I said, okay, but how much is that lab costing? And then they said something like 1 million. I said, okay, but if you would invest, or an investor would invest 1 million, and you have your own lab, which you can use 100% of the time, right? That would benefit the business case. They couldn't make that calculation because in the end there were some other things, but I would just mean to the idea that you're saying that it costs 10 million. Okay, so what? If 10 million is something that your company makes, you will become 100 million, 10 billion worth, or 1 billion worth. It's right then.
Because behind the lab that is just the annual cost. Then there is the investment. Let's say.
I understand, but I mean, this may be a little bit too much. But you know what I mean? No,
I completely get it. It's just that sometimes you rely on also. Let's say when you also change a machine, you have to develop the whole know-how again. You might be lucky that everything comes out as it was before, but that's not always the truth. So that's also one of the things of hooking up companies here. If you are really attached to the laboratory, because that's the only and the safest way to get your things done before scaling up, because it's an investment that you cannot afford. So an example, like using that leverage, let's say, brings you to stay in that place.
Physical
the wrong reason, but still.
But it depends, like, because an example, like we are microelectronic facility, so basically every machinery that we use is 2-3 million and is there, and has been an investment done by Delft and is not, of course, used just by us, but basically something that any startup alone can afford. Or another way maybe to have bigger lab and facility that are only meant for startups.
Exactly, that's right.
And
that's what they do in
technological
Delft, right? With the DSM campus. They created specifically for companies only to develop.
The problem is that there are so many technologies out there that, let's say, can be a biological facility, but then you will need a bigger. It would be nice to create these big pools, like we have the accelerator buildings in which there are only startups and all the machines that you might dream about, but it's a lot of investment.
Okay, guys. Yeah, I think we talked over more than an hour. Yeah. Really interesting. Thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. And I think that we have there's hope, right?
Definitely. I think things are going in the right way. Thanks for having
and I hope that you will get some funding.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. All right.